Thank you very much all for this very beautiful and symbolic little ceremony. I now request our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Praveen Sinclair, to say a few words of welcome. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Jadhav, Professor Pillai, Mr. Tolia, friends, colleagues over here and at all the regional centers, 61 of them, and all the viewers of the live webcast. I welcome you all to this occasion, very special occasion for us. The 24th Foundation Day. In 1985, when this was started, I think Rajiv Gandhi ji had many hopes, and hopes that the vision of his mother would grow the way she had wanted it to. And I think we have moved very much in that direction. Had she been alive, she would have been very proud of what she sees over here. So I welcome you all to this occasion for joining us in this growth, not only to celebrate, but to also help us reflect on the way the growth curve has moved. We started with 2 academic programs in 1987 with 4,500 odd students. Now, as you have heard several times today, we have over 2.5 million students in over 330 programs across the country. We started with a handful, literally a handful of people in the YMCA Delhi, staff members. We are over 400 teaching and 1,500 non-teaching staff across the country. We have PIs, across partner institutions across the world. We have programs online, which means there are no boundaries. So I think we are giving access to the disadvantaged not only in India, but across the world. Is our growth sustainable? Is it innovative? Is it inclusive? Part of the reflection is that for us, stepping into our 25th year, and today Dr. Jadhav is with us to help us see how we can improve. We know him, of course, as eminent economist, being with the IMF, with the RBI, and so on. Eminent educationist, we also know him as VC of Pune. I don't know how many of us know him as an eminent author, particularly of his autobiographical work, which is not only in Marathi and English, but in 17 other languages, I think. And it's doing very well in all those languages. He's got the Sahitya Akademi Award for translation in Punjabi, if I'm not mistaken. And he started, of course, with a BSc in statistics, so he's really an all-rounder. A very well-known public speaker also. And today we will be seeing all these dimensions of him. And I hope this is just the beginning of a much longer relationship that we will have with you, sir. I welcome you all again over here, and I repeat, Happy Foundation Day to all my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sinclair, for that very interesting introduction to an extremely multifaceted and interesting personality, who incidentally is a good friend of IGNOU. He presided over the convocation in our regional center in Pune in 2007. I now request our Vice Chancellor, Professor V.N. Rajshekharan Pillai, to make his presidential remarks. Sir.
Dr. Narendra Jadhav, Professor Sinclair, Mr. Tolia, members of the Board of Management, distinguished guests, Pro Vice Chancellors, my colleagues from the university, dear students, members of the printed and electronic media, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank Dr. Narendra Jadhav for accepting our invitation to be here to deliver the 24th Foundation Day lecture. He was kind enough to be here in the formal launch of the Silver Jubilee celebrations of the university. It is very significant that this is the first activity after the Silver Jubilee celebration. This is the first activity. As you have seen, our colleagues in the university, my colleagues in the university, they have planned a 1 year long education and development related activities, not just functions, activities, looking at the requirements of the education sector in the country. You are an eminent economist. You are in the planning a mission now. You also headed probably the largest conventional university in this country, Pune University. In the world, okay, largest conventional university in the world, Pune University. You are definitely, you understand the problems of the society in the country, and you know in what direction education should go. You have a feel for that, you are passionate about it. Deprivation of all kinds, that is the reason for divisions in the society. And when it comes to deprivation of education, that is the most serious crime one can ever imagine. And definitely you will be touching on many of these aspects. We are, as we heard from the Honorable Minister today morning, the country is trying to introduce a reform agenda for education in the country, in the midst of it, starting right from primary school education to higher education and research. What is required for whether it be innovation, sustainability, what is required is to break the rigidity of the educational structures in the country. Probably some of my colleagues may be tired of again narrating this story. We talk about innovations in science, contributions in fundamental science and all that. It was almost 50 years, maybe 70 years ago, Sir C.V. Raman worked in this country. At the age of 14 years of age, he could get a BSc Honours in Physics from the erstwhile Presidency College, the now Madras University, of course. The former Vice Chancellor of Madras University, Professor P.T. Manoharan, is also sitting with us. At the age of 14, he could get a BSc Honours in Physics. He was topper. Of course, at that time itself he has published papers and all that. It's a different story. After BSc Honours in Physics, he did not go for MSc Physics. He went to Chartered Accountancy. And he got admitted as a Chartered Accountant practitioner or what apprenticeship. And he came out as a very successful CA, qualification. And he was naturally appointed in the Indian Railways as an accountant, and he was working in Calcutta as an accountant in Calcutta Indian Railways. And there was only one institution of research in the whole of Asia during those time, Indian Association of Cultivation of Science, Calcutta, Indian Association of Cultivation of Science. And C.V. Raman could get registered for PhD in experimental physics, part-time, a chartered accountant. He could get part-time registration for experimental physics in Indian Association of Cultivation of Science for PhD in Calcutta University during those time. Of course, he did, light scattering and all that. He did the entire work which led to the Raman effect and ultimately the Nobel Prize. After completion of his PhD, of course, he published several papers. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee was the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University during those time. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee could identify Raman, his contributions. He invited him to be a professor at the university. course it was British presidency time, there was a condition in the Act of the University that for anybody to be appointed as a teacher or a professor in the university, he or she should go to the UK university and get trained for 2 years, and then only he can be appointed as a teacher in a university. So Raman was offered, he invited Raman, and he told him this condition: we are offering you this position, please accept it, but you have to go and come back. Raman said, no, I don't want your professorship. I don't want your professorship. If I can get on my credibility and on my work, which I did here, if you can offer professorship, I can think about it. Of course, you know that to break statutes and act, it's very difficult. So, he had to go, you know that Queen was the head of the university. It has to go to the Queen. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee could change the act, and got him appointed as professor at Calcutta. Rest is history. He went to Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, as first Indian director. As a non-conformist, he had also problems there. After the independence, not before the independence. After the independence, as a non-conformist, he had also problems there. In his biography, Light of Life, it is mentioned, and Indian Academy of Sciences published the history of Indian Institute of Science. There narrate good stories about that. So he resigned from the directorship of Indian Institute of Science, and he started the Raman Research Institute in Bangalore. So that was 1930s and all that, 1930s, 1940s. Today, is it possible for a student in any university in this country to get a BSc degree at the age of 14? Today, is it possible for a BSc physics student to get admission for a CA, because he should study commerce, this thing and all that, for chartered accountancy? Will any university in this country dare to give a part-time registration in experimental physics for PhD for a BSc honors man working as a chartered accountant in Indian Railways? No. Is any vice chancellor empowered to break, probably to find a provision to accommodate or to facilitate the entry of an eminent qualified person into the system? No. So, with more and more structures, we are building more and more rigidity into the system. When you talk about innovations, when you talk about flexibility, let us only by innovative, flexible approaches, the institutions can proceed. Promotion of independent initiative of the individuals, whether it be student, teacher or institution, that is what is required. Definitely quality assurance, accountability, all these things have to be ensured. If independent initiative is not promoted, there will not be creativity. As I mentioned in the morning, what is actually happening, what has to happen is triumph of creativity over conformity. That is precisely what is required. And any sustainability, any innovation in education system can happen only through such initiatives. And with this, random thoughts on your basic points, let me invite Dr. Narendra Jadhav for the next is for the foundation. There is something else. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for those very, very interesting comments, which I have no doubt will incite a very lively debate in the IGNOU fraternity. It is my pleasant duty now to announce the formal launch of the new knowledge modules on higher education management, developed by a team of eminent educationists from across the country. My esteemed colleague in the School of Education, IGNOU, Professor Vibha Joshi, has coordinated this activity under the able guidance of our Pro-Vice Chancellor, Dr. Latha Pillai. These models are designed to empower teachers of the 21st century to negotiate the multiple roles and responsibilities that the rapidly expanding and changing higher education scenario brings in its wake. I request Professor Vibha Joshi to come on the stage and present the modules for release to our chief guest, along with your young research associates. Thank you very much, and we hope that these modules will be an important resource for our personal and professional development and enable us to become the education managers of the 21st century. We now come to the high point of this evening's gathering, the much-awaited Foundation Day lecture on sustainability, innovation and inclusion in the education sector, to be delivered by Dr. Narendra Jadhav. The Vice-Chancellor and Pro-Vice-Chancellor have familiarized us with Dr. Jadhav's considerable attainments in various aspects of his multifaceted personality. On a personal note, sir, I would like to say how deeply your book, Amsa Bap Ani Amhi, has influenced me and a legion of other readers. The book is poignant, funny, honest, at one and the same time, and it symbolizes really the triumph of hard work and self-belief against all odds. Dr. Jadhav, I welcome you and request you to make the speech without any further ado. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a very generous and warm introduction. Well, actually I always do better when I'm speaking ex-tempore, but this being a formal Foundation Day lecture, I'm going to be constrained to read from a written text, and you will pardon me for that. Vice-Chancellor Professor V.N. Rajashekharan Pillai, Pro-Vice-Chancellors, Registrar, members of the Board of Management, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I feel greatly honored to have been invited to the Foundation Day celebrations of Indira Gandhi National Open University. I am thankful to the Vice-Chancellor Professor Rajashekharan Pillai for giving me this opportunity to deliver this 24th Foundation Day lecture today. Indira Gandhi National Open University, popularly known as IGNOU, entered on the Indian education scene nearly a quarter century ago. And over these years, IGNOU, modeled as an open and distance education system, has come a long way from imparting education through mail correspondence to advanced methods like direct-to-home audiovisual method with the help of dedicated television channel Gyan Darshan. Over its existence spanning almost a quarter century, IGNOU has grown manifold. The university's annual fresh enrollment has crossed 5 lakhs in the year 2002, and cumulative student strength today is more than 2 million, which is equivalent to 15% of the total student population in all the universities in India. So IGNOU is the largest informal or non-conventional university probably in the world, and I come from Pune University, which has now become the largest traditional university in the world. Having a student strength of 2 million, which is equivalent to 15% of the total student population of all universities in India, is a remarkable kind of thing. IGNOU has been spreading its wings by establishing 21 schools of study and a network of 59 regional centers, over 2,300 learner support centers, around 52 overseas centers, and more than 134 two-way video conferencing centers, covering more than 175 certificate programs and over 1,500 courses in different branches. Importantly, these numbers have been increasing year after year. Moreover, IGNOU has also founded several institutes, including IGNOU Institute of Vocational Education and Training, Northeast Center for Research and Development, IGNOU Center for Open and Distance Learning, the Advanced Center for Informatics and Innovative Learning, and Center for Corporate Education, Training and Consultancy. I heartily commend Vice Chancellor Professor Pillai and his team for the remarkable contribution that IGNOU has been making in the education sector over the years. As was referred to this morning, very rightly, the Honorable Minister of Human Resource Development referred to IGNOU's effort, and even President of India referred to IGNOU's efforts as a pioneering kind of effort, and we all feel very happy about this. In this Foundation Day lecture today, friends, I propose to share some thoughts on a subject of a great contemporary relevance: sustainability, innovation and inclusion in the education sector. And I would like to present my thoughts on this theme as follows. First of all, I propose to present an overview of the Indian education scenario, talking about the rigidities that the Vice Chancellor was talking about, what he mentioned, with special reference to various initiatives which are proposed in the 11th five-year plan. Secondly, I propose to discuss various dimensions of open and distance learning system, especially in the context of the much needed inclusion, sustainability and innovation in the education sector. Finally, I propose to highlight the importance of convergence between the traditional education system and open and distance learning system as a way forward, probably the only way forward. Let me begin with the education sector scenario. Education plays a vital role in the growth and development of any nation. Knowledge has come to occupy center stage in the development process, with the realization that a significant new relationship has emerged between knowledge and the economy. It is increasingly being recognized that the countries with capacity to generate new knowledge and skilled human power are likely to have a comparative edge in attaining high economic growth and sustaining their growth momentum over those countries which do not. What education does essentially is to improve functional and analytical abilities of individuals. This opens up opportunities for individuals as well as groups to achieve greater access to employment opportunities as well as professional fulfillment. A well-trained and educated labor force is a prerequisite for meeting the labor supply requirements of sustained higher growth. Moreover, education is not only, and this was also a point that was made by Honorable President this morning in the inaugural function, education is not only an instrument of enhancing efficiency, but it is also an instrument of socio-economic transformation. It is an effective tool for widening and augmenting demographic participation and upgrading the overall quality of individual and societal life. Let's talk briefly about the school education. The Government of India launched, as we all know, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in the year 2001-2002 as one of the most important flagship schemes aimed at providing useful and relevant elementary education for all children in the age group of 6 to 14, besides bridging social, regional and gender gaps with active participation of local community. The scheme is implemented in all schools in partnership with the states and union territories in a mission mode. And the 11th five-year plan has provided an outlay of as much as 71,000 crore for this flagship scheme. The outcomes of this SSA, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, so far are very, very encouraging. It has succeeded in achieving near universal access to primary education. The number of rural habitation having access to primary school within a distance of 1 kilometer has increased from 87% in 2002 to as much as 99% in 2008, and that for an upper primary school within a distance of 3 kilometers from 78% in 2002 to 92% in 2008. The average increase in enrollment has increased. The average enrollment has increased by 58 lakh per year during the first 5 years of its operation, and this increase is largely contributed to by growth in enrollment at primary level. Incidentally, the dropout rate has declined at an average rate of 10% during this period. The gender gap in the enrollment has also declined from 17.1 percentage points in 2001-2002 to 6.9 percentage points in 2006-2007, with girls' dropout rate declining at a faster rate than that for the boys. Recently, there has been a paradigm shift from access to quality. Accordingly, about 57% of the funds under the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan are allocated for appointment of additional teachers, teachers training, provision of free textbooks and remedial teaching. With a sanction of over 12 lakh teachers, the teacher-pupil ratio in primary schools has improved from 1 to 43 students per teacher in 2001-2002 to 33 students per teacher in the year 2008-2009. Now this is all sounds very good, but there is a flip side. On the flip side, what do we see? What we see is that systemic issues such as teacher absenteeism, single teacher schools, multi-grade teaching are yet to be resolved fully. While the access has improved substantially with the help of midday meal scheme, the quality of learning has remained far below expectations. Some independent surveys have in fact shown that often a child in the 5th grade cannot read a book for the 2nd grade. While the states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka seem to have accelerated their overall performance, most North Indian and Eastern region states, including the Northeastern states, are still lagging behind. The situation is worse in states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Assam, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and West Bengal in terms of access to school. Needless to say that this poses a formidable challenge which is being taken up with the Right to Education Act 2009. Same thing is in the higher education. In higher education, what do we see? The central agenda, we all know that if you take a glance at the relevant facts of higher education, India is probably the 3rd largest higher education system in the world, only after China and USA. And we have, by last count, we have 431 universities, 20,677 colleges, around 5 lakh and 5,000 teachers, and over 116 lakh students, of which 15% are going to the IGNOU system. There are a large number of educational institutions where standard of education is probably comparable to the best in the world and where outstanding research is being conducted in key areas. Yet, there are far too many challenges that we need to address. What are the main challenges that the 21st century, what are the main challenges for the 21st century with respect to higher education in India? I personally like to see higher education in terms of a number of dimensions: access, quality, affordability and employability. Let us examine each one of them in that order. Let's start with the access. In the age group of 18 to 23 years, which is deemed to be the age group for higher education, the proportion of Indian youth that has access to higher education, what we call gross enrollment ratio, was only around 11% in 2005. And this is, as we all know, is exceptionally low in international comparison. For example, in the United States, the gross enrollment ratio in 2005 was as high as 83%, whereas even in emerging market economies like China and Brazil, it has been ranging between 20 to 24%. In India, the problem of exceedingly low access to higher education with 11% GER basically means that 89% of our youth do not have access to higher education. We have a long way to go there. In India, the problem of exceedingly low access to higher education is compounded further by multiple disparities such as the rural-urban divide, gender gaps between male-female, social gaps, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and others, as well as Muslims and non-Muslims. Illustratively, and these examples these numbers are really should be eye-opening, are eye-openers. Within the overall average gross enrollment ratio of 11%, we all know averages often conceal more than what they reveal. And here is a good example of that. Overall GER is around 11%, but the GER, the gross enrollment ratio of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe subgroup is only 6.3%, whereas for Muslims, it was 6.84%. Take the case of female Muslims. For female Muslims, the GER was only 5.8%, and that for female SC/ST group, it ranged between only 4.43% to 4.76%. If you make a further subdivision on the basis of poor and non-poor, what do we see? We see that GER for poor scheduled caste, scheduled tribe works out to abysmally low level of 1.55% to 1.89%, whereas for the poor rural scheduled caste, scheduled tribe subgroup, it turns out to be at shamefully low level of only 1.11% to 1.31%. So when we are talking about 11% as our overall GER, which is incredibly low in comparison with the international standards, the other side of the story is that within this overall average of 11%, if you look at various vulnerable and socially disadvantaged groups, within this we find that there are groups, particularly the rural scheduled caste, poor rural scheduled caste, scheduled tribe group, where the GER at this time and day is only between 1.11% to 1.35%. I think that is a very, very serious problem. So the first challenge that we need to address is to increase access to higher education generally, and with a special focus on the disadvantaged and marginalized strata of the society. The second challenge that we have is the improvement, much needed improvement in the quality of our higher education. Quality is another very serious problem with the existing system of higher education in India. There are several problems here, but I would like to highlight only two of them. First, the curricula of several courses in most universities are seriously out of alignment today. And two, a discomfortingly large proportion of college teachers are blissfully unaware of the advances in their own subject. I think this is a lethal combination in our education system. We have curricula which are out of date, and we have teachers who are out of sync. We can't do worse than this for our students. You know, others can do this to us, but this is something that we have done to ourselves. Taken together, these two issues have had a perilous effect on the quality of higher education in India. Just look at these numbers. Out of 417 universities in India that existed by end of March 2008, only about 140, that is nearly only 1/3 of the total, were accredited by the NAAC, the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. The results of the accreditation process also show that only 31% of our universities were graded A, while the remaining 69% were placed either in B or C grade. When you look at the colleges, the picture is even worse. Out of the 20,676 colleges that existed by end of March 2008, only 3,492, that is only 70% of our colleges were assessed and accredited by the NAAC. Here again, the results are very disconcerting. We find that among the colleges, only 9% of the colleges graded turned out to be A grade, and the remaining 91% colleges graded where it turned out to be either having grade B or grade C. So, while the NAAC accreditation process has been exceedingly slow, it has clearly pointed out glaring deficiencies in terms of availability and quality of teachers and other infrastructural facilities. Indeed, the studies have shown that on an average, 25% of our faculty positions are vacant in the universities, and as many as 57% of our teachers do not have either MPhil or PhD. The culture of quality consciousness must grow in the education sector. Concerted efforts are therefore necessary to improve quality of higher education through faculty improvement programs, academic staff colleges, and the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. Yet another dimension, the third dimension of higher education that I would like to talk about is affordability. We have a very complex structure of higher educational institutions, including state universities, central universities, deemed universities, and private institutions. The cost structure of higher education that is emerging especially in the private sector, is exceedingly high and virtually unaffordable for a very large mass of students. In effect, therefore, access to higher education is effectively denied to a very large strata of Indian society. The fourth dimension of higher education in India is employability. In this regard, what is worrisome is the rift or the chasm between the evolving societal needs and the kind of higher education that is currently being imparted. This chasm, this rift has in fact been widening, and this raises the question of relevance of higher education that is being imparted today. For example, even very good students, when employed, need several months of training before they become functional. In an IT company, typically, I was told that it takes on an average 8 to 10 months of vigorous on-the-job training before the new entrants, fresh from the university, become functionally useful to the company. Training is certainly not the forte of the company. It should be the forte of the universities and the educational institutions. This ought to be the forte of educational institutions, and this calls for a very substantial improvement in terms of university and industry interaction. On the whole, there are serious challenges in the education sector that we as a nation have to address. In fact, the importance of education today is far more than ever before. To my mind, in fact, our transition towards becoming an economic superpower and securing a place of pride in comity of nations critically depends on whether or not we are willing to overhaul and bring about a major reform in the higher education sector. With this, let me turn to vocational education and skill building, because acquisition of knowledge, the other part of that is skill building and acquisition of skills. For a long time, the skill development in India largely meant development of shop floor or manual skills. The NSS 61 round results show that among persons of age between 15 to 29, only 2% had received some kind of formal vocational training, and another only 8% had received non-formal vocational training, indicating that most young persons actually enter the world of work today without any kind of formal vocational training. This proportion, so our proportion of our youth who have access to formal or informal vocational training is less than 10%. How does this compare? This proportion of trained youth is one of the lowest in the world. Elsewhere in the world, this proportion is very high. For example, in Korea it is 96%, in Germany it is 75%, in Japan it is 80%, and it is in UK it is 68%, and we are stuck at 10%. In India, there are nearly 17 different ministries and departments of the government who are imparting vocational training to about 3.1 million persons every year through polytechnics and industrial training institutes. However, this effort is hardly sufficient given that the number of new entrants to the workforce every year are 12.8 million. Further, there are institutional limitations in the existing system. One, there are many, but I want to focus on two. First of all, the organized sector in our country, in our labor market, which constitutes about 93% of our workforce, is hardly, if at all, supported by any structured system of acquiring skills. By and large, skill formation takes place through informal channels only, with no linkages to formal education. Alarmingly, and this is truly alarming, 38% of the Indian labor force is illiterate, and about 80% of the workforce in rural and urban areas does not possess any identifiable marketable skills. It is expected frankly, this is where our strength actually lies. We can build a strength there. 38% of our labor force being illiterate and about 80% workforce in rural and urban areas not being educated and not possessing any identifiable marketable skills. I was told that the surveys after surveys have shown that, whenever we talk about manpower, it was fashionable some years back to talk about we are third largest technical reservoir of manpower and we produce X lakh of engineers and Y lakhs of doctors. Fact of the matter is these numbers have to be taken in proportion to the rate of growth of the economy. And these numbers, which may be large earlier times but not any longer, today we are growing in the range of 8% and we are hoping to have a double-digit growth rate. If you compare that, for maintaining and sustaining such a high growth rate, our requirement of technically qualified manpower is much, much larger than what we are producing now. In any case, when they say that we are producing 5 lakh engineers every year, surveys after surveys have shown that more than 30% of them are completely unemployable. Now, this is something which is a very serious view has to be taken. In fact, worldwide, if you take a worldwide view, look at the world in terms of the aging economies. In the morning, Mr. Kapil Sibal was talking about the demographic dividend, and we all know that India is a very young nation. We have the average age of only 24 now, and in the next until 2020, in the year 2020, our average age is going to be only 29, whereas China is going to be 37, United States more than 40, and Japan close to 50. With all that, we have a great advantage and we keep talking about it. But demographic dividend is like a check that needs to be encashed. We can encash that demographic dividend and harness the demographic dividend only if we put our education sector in order, only if we can put our skill building mechanisms in order. If we don't do that, in fact the potential, just look at the potential. It is expected that in the aging global economies, skilled manpower shortage by the year 2020 is projected to be the order of 56.5 million. So by the year 2020, 56.5 million would be the manpower, skilled manpower shortage in the global economy. Now, we have all the numbers in terms of the youth that is required to fill these gaps, but for that, we have to make very serious effort to upgrade the skills of our labor force. Then alone we can possibly harness the potential demographic dividend. In fact, we have all the potential. If we put our skill building mechanisms in order, we have all the potential to be a reservoir for providing to the world the necessary skilled manpower. That is what we possess. But the critical thing is that we need to develop the mechanisms which will train all these people. We all know that Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh has now instituted a skill development mission with a plan outlay of 22,800 crore for mass and rapid skill development. The structure of the mission as of today consists of National Council on Skill Development, National Skill Development Coordination Board, and National Skill Development Corporation. The apex body, chaired by the Prime Minister himself, is meant for steering the mission through policy directions. Coordination Board, the National Skill Development Coordination Board, is expected to coordinate between 17 different government departments and machinery and ministries for better utilization of resources and identifying focused areas where the corporation set up by Ministry of Finance would act upon these issues in collaboration with private participants. This comprehensive exercise includes concerted efforts ranging from enhancing the quality of higher educational institutions by way of more stringent accreditation system to refinement in existing skill building programs like apprenticeships, offering the youth the much needed financial flexibility to learn while they earn. It is in the same spirit, we all know that under the 11th five-year plan, the focus is really on education and skill building. An 11th plan has placed the highest priority on education as a central instrument for achieving rapid and inclusive growth. In the 11th plan, the central government envisages an outlay of about 2.70 lakh crore at current prices, or 2.37 crore at 2006-2007 prices for education. This is a four-fold increase over the 10th plan allocation, which was 0.54 lakh crore at 2006-2007 prices. The share of education in the total plan outlay will correspondingly increase from 7.7% to 19.4%. Around 50% of 11th plan outlay is for elementary education and literacy, 20% for secondary education, and 30% for higher education, including technical education. This reflects the high priority being given to the education sector by the central government and represents a credible progress towards raising the public spending of the center and states combined to 6% of GDP. I do not want to go through the specific schemes, but may it be elementary education or secondary education, vocational education, higher education, there are big schemes, and the involvement of the government has increased enormously. And we are right now, as a matter of fact, we are in the halfway through the 11th five-year plan, and as of now what we are doing is reviewing the midterm appraisal of the plan is currently underway, and we are hoping to finish the midterm appraisal of the 11th five-year plan to be published by end of December. By end of December, we want to complete the midterm appraisal, and all these schemes, many of them have taken off, many of them have done very well, some of them have not taken off, some of them are not doing as well as they were expected to. So the fine-tuning is right now being done in terms of the midterm appraisal, and this time the midterm appraisal is going to be very, very critical. We are hoping to complete the midterm appraisal of all schemes, including those in education, by end of December, and hopefully in the month of January there would be the National Development Council meeting, and that will give a fresh direction to education and other schemes in future. Now, without going through all those specific schemes, I want to now come to the final part of my address in terms of the way forward. The several initiatives, schemes that have been incorporated in the 11th five-year plan are no doubt steps in the right direction. However, it is evident that these initiatives are not likely to be adequate considering the enormous challenges that we are going to face in the near future. The social awakening and rising aspirations across different strata of our society means steadily growing demand for more and more educational facilities. In near future, not only our number of aspirants is going to rise, but also the urge for quality as well as employability. Under these circumstances, the traditional education delivery system alone is unlikely to be sufficient to match the aspirations of our people. The traditional education system, we all know, has its own limitations. The schools or colleges which are built with brick and mortar offer limited flexibility in terms of the student enrollment. The traditional education delivery system cannot fully address in a cost-effective manner the problem of knowledge divide in a country like India, where socio-economic, geographical and demographic diversities are so pronounced. In this regard, the open and distance learning system with an alternative delivery mechanism that is flexible, mobile, affordable and easily accessible offers an exceedingly important complementary mechanism. The ODL, which started with mail correspondence providing education to students sitting away from the colleges and university, with the advancement of technology, particularly advancement in communications technology, the mode of distance learning became more and more sophisticated as well as user-friendly. First, the arrival of radio and television, and now internet communication by way of email, webcasting, websites, social internet working has transformed the experience of open and distance learners. The virtual campuses today are filling the gap which was not addressed by traditional educational system. And as Vice Chancellor Pillai was saying, this is the system which is also offering an opportunity to avoid the rigidities of the conventional educational system that we have had. As mentioned earlier, a significant majority of our population is still struggling to access education. The traditional education system is not equipped to accommodate such a large population. We need to find more sustainable and innovative ways of setting up education delivery system which could break the barriers of geographical boundaries, language, caste, gender, and so on. We must also expand our education system to accommodate the group of communities who were outside the periphery of traditional education system. This is where we need creativity or conformity, as was mentioned by Vice Chancellor Pillai. As we know, the distance learning system does not require students to assemble in a particular location, but instead, and I quote here, reaches out to students where they live or wish to study. Distance education therefore can be understood more as a method of delivery than an educational philosophy, where distance is not a defining characteristic of learning. Distance learning, distance learning has been existing for generations, but in fact, I look at even the story of Ekalavya in those who have read my English version of my book. I have related the story of Ekalavya. That was the first experiment in distance education years ago. But we have come a long way since then. Distance learning has been existing for generations, but the sector has been transformed significantly over time with the advancement and application of new technologies. Beginning with mail correspondence in the early 20th century, distance education then benefited from the emergence of radio and TV platforms, followed by CD-ROM technology some 2 decades ago. The distance learning landscape was then dramatically expanded and transformed by the introduction of the Internet, along with such key applications as email and electronic messaging. Information communication technologies have exponentially boosted the potential of distance education to reach the enormous new pools of students. It has allowed for real growth in numbers and types of providers, curricular developers, and modes of delivery, as well as innovations in both academic approaches and content. The ICT explosion does hold potential for breaking down barriers of time, space, and privileges, lowering cost, and enabling collaboration and creativity in teaching, learning, and research. And therefore, to my mind, in my considered view, the distance and open learning system holds a great promise to bridge the knowledge divide in diverse country like India. Apart from technology, innovations in forging new partnerships and networks and at the institutional level are also required. Innovations aimed at creating new partnership between national, regional, and local players and communities in order to ensure more participative approaches is equally important. Accordingly, innovating with the new ideas to create affordable and effective access mechanism is in fact imperatively needed. The final 2 paragraphs, here I am talking about the hope for the future. Though the open distance learning has enormous benefit, it requires huge investment in infrastructure, trained staff, teachers, technicians, and credibility of accreditation method. The ODL requires huge investment in communication and information technology. Also, the success of ODL lies, on the other hand, on the other essential resources like electricity, communication network, and so on. In a country where traditional educational machinery is predominant, as is the case with us, credibility and quality of distance and open learning question is often doubted. Therefore, proper accreditation machinery is required to gain the necessary confidence. There is a need, this is the last paragraph, there is a need to combine the advantages of both the traditional as well as the open and distance learning so that education can be provided on a mass scale and with a rapid pace. In such a scenario, convergence of a traditional and ODL systems of delivery may be exceedingly helpful. The traditional education system, if it is equipped with modern information and communication technology, it can transform education on its part, and at the other extreme, like IGNOU has done last year, has taken a new initiative in creating convergence scheme which combines the benefits of traditional education system as well as open and distance learning system. The university has developed e-Gyanakosh, a unique digital repository giving open access to all its materials, which is a kind of pioneering step, yet another pioneering step in India's education sector. So convergence of the traditional mechanism of education delivery and the ODL is something which is going to decide the future of our education sector, and that is what our accent in policy in future should be on attaining the right kind of convergence between these two competing and complementary systems of delivery in the education sector. I want to thank the organizers, particularly Vice Chancellor Professor Pillai, for having given me this opportunity to come here and speak to you, and I give my best wishes for the Silver Jubilee celebrations of Indira Gandhi to our IGNOU, and I must say that I'm very impressed. 24 years is not a long period in the life of an institution, but what IGNOU has achieved in 24 years is truly remarkable, and this gives, like President and like the Honorable Minister of HRD, it has given all of us a confidence that next 25 years would be even more eventful, and IGNOU, I wish IGNOU's unfolding progress all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zadav, for a very scintillating and thought-provoking speech. I invite the Vice Chancellor to make a few comments. If
you call me, I definitely. Thank you very much, Dr. Jadhav. You have given us an agenda for 25 years. But of course, I would like to inform you that on November 19, the scheme of convergence between conventional universities and open and distance learning was launched by Srimati Purandeshwari in the absence of Mr. Arjun Singh in this hall. The genesis of that particular scheme was based on a parliamentary committee recommendation on higher education. There was a recommendation. The then minister called the chairman UGC, chairman AICT, and the Vice Chancellor Indira Gandhi National Open University, me. In his Rajya Sabha chamber, the minister was a Rajya Sabha member, so minister in his Rajya Sabha chamber, he called me after the meeting. Called us, all of us. The Secretary Education was also called, Joint Secretaries of Distance Learning. It was decided that these bodies work together and try out a scheme known as convergence of conventional universities and the distance learning systems. As you rightly mentioned, of course we implemented it. Again, it is also facing some problem of triumph of creativity over conformism. Of course, we have very successful institutions, over 450 institutions practicing in the country, colleges. We have selected the best colleges for this particular scheme. What we have suggested is that the overall purpose of open and distance learning, technology enhanced learning, is to improve the quality of the teaching learning process as well as to enhance the quantity of education delivery. You were definitely emphasizing access and success. If there is no success, there will not be access, sir. There will not be access. Gross enrollment ratio will not enhance unless and until we improve the quality of the teaching learning process in the classroom. The students will not come to the classroom. For the last 37 years, I have been hearing as a teacher, 39 years as a teacher, enhancing the gross enrollment ratio 5%, 5.5%, 6% and all that. Even now we are maybe 10% or below 10%. We talk to 12%. If we want to really come to 20% or to 25%, as the minister says, we need generational changes in our in our approaches, in our strategies. And convergence is one scheme which this university has started, and of course we are also in the process of finding the necessary funds. But now we have, from our own funds, we are doing it. We sincerely believe that that is the alternative. So you also mentioned that ODL is only a tool for education, rightly. It is any teacher, any learner in any system of learning, they should understand how the new technologies can be used for technology. All these points are very important. In the skill development mission also, Indira Gandhi National Open University would like to work. I think you have really studied the whole system within a short time. Of course, you are in the education, because there is no difference between education or economic systems or anything. Everything is interrelated. Within the short time, you could understand the real problems. So in this country, we know the problems, we know the solutions. We also know that if we apply the solutions, the systems will improve. But we are not implementing. If somebody is trying to implement, we will try to pull them down. That should not happen. So therefore, we know the problems, we know the solutions. It is for us to, with courage of conviction, to implement these strategies. We will be with you. We will definitely work out strategies to achieve such targets. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those comments. I'm sure you will all agree that we have been privileged to be part of a very, very interesting evening. And before we conclude the proceedings for the day, I request the Registrar Administration, Mr. U.S. Tolia, to offer the vote of thanks, and do join us for a cup of tea after that. Thank you very much.
Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Narendra Jadhav ji, Member Planning Commission, Government of India. Honorable Vice Chancellor, IGNOU, Professor V.N. Rajshekharan Pillai, members of the Board of Management, Academic Council, Planning Board, and other statutory bodies and authorities. Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor O.P. Mishra, Professor Praveen Sinclair, Dr. D.K. Chaudhary, Dr. Lata Pillai, Professor K.R. Srivatsan, media representative, both electronic and print, Honorable HODs, senior functionaries and colleagues from the IGNOU, distinguished guests and from other universities, institutions, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor and proud privilege for me to be called upon to propose a vote of thanks on the occasion of 24th Foundation Day lecture. I do so, sir, on behalf of the Indira Gandhi National Open University, entire fraternity of the higher education, guests, invitees who are present here today, extend my thanks to you. Sir, we are indeed grateful to you for having taken time out of your busy schedule and agreed to deliver this important lecture and today, and the most erudite, valuable and perspective insight that you have shared with us in the light of your own study and vast experience in various capacities and around the globe. Sir, we thank you once again for sharing with us, with this august audience, your vision of education for our country and examples given during your lecture such as Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, paradigm shift from access to quality, student and teachers ratio and its flip side, other challenges to education in India in the 21st century, including rate of growth of economy vis-a-vis availability and requirement of a skilled manpower in India, as well as hope for the future. Thank you, sir. I thank Honorable Vice Chancellor for his wisdom, encouragement and guidance. As always, he has set out a clear direction and objective which will be for all concerned to follow and achieve, such as innovation, innovative practices, experimentation, openness, proactiveness, mutual trust, to name a few. I would like to inform the chief guest that you have rightly emphasized the importance of convergence of open and distance learning and the conventional system of education. Complementing the classroom, face-to-face teaching is the step necessary for enhancing the GER, gross enrollment ratio, and the quality of the teaching learning process. In this connection, I would like to inform you, sir, that IGNOU has initiated this convergence scheme as recommended by the last Parliamentary Standing Committee, and is a major scheme, and it is a major scheme and under consideration by the Planning Commission during the 11th plan. We have also skill development programs under School of Vocational and Educational Training and community colleges. I thank our most valued distinguished guests and invitees who have come from different destinations for having found time from their extremely busy schedule to have made this program possible, besides their support and cooperation. We are also thankful to all the former Vice Chancellors, HODs, past and present, senior functionaries, employees past and present, and for their valuable support and cooperation. My sincere thanks to the anchor person, Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya, media personnel, both print and electronic, including Doordarshan, and IGNOU's Electronic Media and Production Center for giving us excellent coverage to our program across the country, and regional centers of IGNOU for their logistic support. Sir, an event of this size, of this dimension, cannot happen overnight. I have been fortunate enough to be guided by none less than the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Praveen Sinclair, and to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues like Director EMPC, Shri Ravi Kant and his entire team, Engineer Sudhir Reddy and his entire team, Manjulika Srivastav, Dr. Nilima Nanda, Professor Raju, Registrar Administration Office, entire Registrar Administration Office, particularly General Administration, under Mr. K.K. Sharma and Arun Jha, and Shri Patwal and the entire team of administration. Thanks also due to Dr. Rosharia, Shri Natarajan and the entire MPDD team for printing invitation cards. For Finance Officer and Mr. Cherian Thomas and his entire team. Security Officer for the nice tight arrangements, and Dr. Yadav for nice floor arrangements. Sir, I cannot thank everyone enough for the involvement they have shown and the willingness they have expressed to take on completion of tasks and to ensure that this occasion becomes a memorable success. I thank you all for your attention and thanks for coming and evincing interest in this memorable event. Thank you very much.
I would like to announce that there's going to be a cultural program organized by our newly fledged School of Performing and Visual Arts. So do enjoy it at 4:30. Thank you. And do join us now for the high tea, which has been arranged for all of us. Thank you.